am going to do an introduction just because we do have one new person. And Patty, I got to hear a little bit about you, but I didn't tell you who I am. So my name is Hope Newport. I'm the Family Services Manager here at the IFOPA. So I helped launch this Resilient Living program in March of last year, and we've been doing a couple different things in the last year and couple months now to share it with the community, but this is our first community training opportunity for everyone to join in. So this is the third of our 10 sessions in the Resilient Living series, and today we are going to talk about the ability to self-calm. And I just wanted to let you all know that this portion of the presentation will be recorded, and the slides will be posted. So if you're someone who likes to take notes or feels like they want to have all the information, don't feel the need to scribble it or rush to get it all written down, because you'll be able to go back and view these slides. And I also just wanted to say that if you are currently unmuted, so Patty, if you want to go ahead and mute your mic just to limit any background noise for this first part. After I go through more of the presentation style portion of the information, we'll have more of an interactive workshop style where we'll do some activities together and have a chance to share. But this will be recorded and available online, so you can go back and reference this at any time. So I wanted to start with a quick recap of sort of the best practices from the emotional acknowledgement session that we did last month. Can't believe it's been a whole month already, but just because it's helpful, these faucets do build off of each other. So emotional expressiveness, emotional acknowledgement, and self-calming in particular are very intertwined. So what we discussed last month was that being aware of our emotional state is sort of the critical first step of that process. Then being able to name and feel your true feelings or identify what your emotion or feelings are, really without any judgment or without trying to stuff or ignore or talk ourselves out of those emotions is important. And we know that if we are aware of our emotions and we feel them, that's an important part of trying to diffuse them and take away some of their energy, because it's important. I think one of the big takeaways from this session was that the goal is for us to have control of them and not let them drive the bus, so to speak, or not let our emotions steer our actions or how we treat people or how we think. And so these are sort of a quick recap of some of the steps that can be helpful when you're trying to go through this process. And you'll see throughout this, the step 2 is take a few deep breaths. Step 5 is take a deep breath. Step 7 is take another deep breath. So deep breathing is a huge part of self-calming. Self-calming is really important for us to be able to quickly acknowledge and process our emotions efficiently. So these two are very intertwined, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about a few of the things that we mentioned last week, but dive really into some specific exercises and why it is that self-calming is so critical. So first, we're going to start with what is self-calming. The ability to self-calm is the ability to effectively manage your response to stress by being aware of your nervous system. So we're going to talk more about our nervous system and what that all entails here in a minute. But it is managing your response to stress by being aware of your nervous system and then actively recovering in the moment with relaxation methods. So deep breathing, that could be slower, deeper breaths, grounding, really feeling your feet on the floor, taking root and kind of noticing where you are. Mindfulness, that could be naming or noticing sights, sounds, feelings. It's very sensory related, engaging in those senses. So getting a drink, having a snack, playing with some silly putty or some sort of stress ball. That's a pretty popular one. The concept of just this. So we're going to talk about this also a little bit later, but just focusing on that one thing at a time. And I'm really trying to be in the present. And I think especially in today's times when we can be so overwhelmed and overrun with different thoughts coming from many different, angles, it's really just focusing back in on one thing in particular. And then using calming images or quotes or mantras and reassuring self-talk. So, I can do this, I'm okay, really helping to set our thoughts and our intentions in the right direction. So, and I feel like it's funny to start off a presentation by sharing like a checklist of these are the things you can do, because it feels like you're supposed to build up to that. But one thing that I really love about self-calming is that it can be as simple as just breathing. I mean, if you are being intentional, taking deep breaths in and out, that is an effective way to self-calm. And I love that this facet of the resilient living framework is so easily accessible for us, throughout the day, no matter how stressed we may be or how new we may be to this topic. I really love that part about it. So training our brain to self-calm. So we know that our brain reflects the life we lead. If we've repeatedly experienced stressors or allowed our body to spend prolonged periods of time in this, the stress state that we feel, it kind of just becomes a habit. We get so used to being stressed that we notice the effects less and less. And we have sort of a decreased incentive to move back to that calm state because we've spent so much time in the stress state that we almost don't realize we're functioning on that level. And so many people live life in this constant state, without even necessarily being aware of it or of how it impacts our body. So sometimes we have to make an active choice to train our brain and to react in a way that allows us to quickly cope with life stressors. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today, is sort of the retraining of our brain and how we can do that. So another important reminder in this last sentence, effectively managing our body's response to stress and trauma. It says that for every outside event we experience, our brain responds in two ways: first emotionally and then intellectually. So it's just one more reminder that the self-calming and the emotional expressiveness are really tied and working together, because self-calming requires an ability for us to be able to practice that emotional expressiveness. In order to rationally think and be able to really process and engage in a situation. So diving a little bit deeper into the autonomic nervous system, which is what we're really trying to harness. This is the key component of self-calming. It's the engine that we have to keep running smoothly in order to be able to stay healthy and calm. So the engine is composed of two parts: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so this graphic on the right, I think, can be kind of a helpful way to remember the accelerator is sort of our gasoline. So when we are going into the sympathetic nervous system, we are going towards that fight or flight response, which is, revving us up to fight or to run away from danger. So we're really accelerating. Our body is sort of picking up pace in a lot of different ways. And the parasympathetic system is sort of our brake pedal. So it is what initiates the freeze and the fight or freeze response that we're going to talk about more here in just a minute. And that freeze is really just sort of a shutdown of our body to conserve and be able to withstand the stressor that we see. So that inhibits the body from overworking. And the goal is to be able to move quickly between these two stages. So, it's not great to be in the sympathetic nervous system all the time, but it's also not good to be in the parasympathetic nervous system all the time. Our body functions best when it is, kind of cycling between these two and not stuck in either one place. So I think that's important to remember. Some people identify some of the symptoms of the parasympathetic nervous system as, just being more relaxed or more calm. And it is good to do that at times. Not that either one of these are bad, but too much of any one of these is obviously can have some physiological repercussions for our body. So why is that? How does the fight, flight, or freeze response work? It is a natural biological reaction that we have to everyday stressors or traumatic triggers that you might perceive as frightening or as stressful. So during the fight, flight, or freeze, the amygdala, this beautiful little fire alarm over here, is signaling to our brain that there is danger, there is some sort of stressor that we're going to need to escape. So that signaling goes to the hypothalamus, which receives the alarm and activates our stress response. Those stress response is a release or a dump of hormones. And so that's cortisol, adrenaline into our bloodstream. We're going to talk about how that impacts our body here in a minute in the next slide. But this is what creates the physiological reaction and prepares our body to either stay and deal with the situation, the fight, to leave or go somewhere else, the flight, or to just shut down mentally and physically, embrace ourselves for that moment. So think we discussed in the emotional expressiveness faucet last month that the flip the lid analogy is when we've entered this, flight, fight, or freeze situation. And this is really talking to the ability of our body to rationally process what's happening, or to kind of get in touch with our more sophisticated reasoning. So this is referencing, that there's a disconnect between our lower brain, our hippocampus and amygdala, and our prefrontal cortex, cerebral cortex, where we're really able to kind of harness those problem solving skills. So one thing I did want to point out in light of the situation we're in now, with COVID, is that I've seen many people compare it to more of the freeze, because we're not physically able to see the virus to, fight it off or battle against it. And there's sort of a, an issue or an inability of us to run away from it because it seems to be everywhere. And so what many people have said is that, our body has, and our mentally, we're going into this sort of freeze stress response where our body is kind of just trying to shut down mentally and physically, and brace and let this really stressful moment pass. So, speaking to today's times, I think that's something that I've tried to be aware of, just, how I feel like my body may be responding to the stressors that I see every day. So, looking at the physiological signs of the fight, flight, or freeze, what can we identify, or what could we use to really take in what's happening with our body and maybe be able to identify some of the symptoms of being in one of these stages? And for being in it for, possibly too long. We never, can avoid it to some extent, that if we go through a stressful reaction, we may experience this, but I just want to remind everyone that it's about being able to move out of that state quickly. So the goal is not to stop any of this from happening. This all has benefits, but it's just keeping it to a shorter time span. So in the sympathetic system, which is again that fight or flight, that's the accelerator, our heart beats faster and our blood pressure rises. We have faster breathing, but shallower breathing. Our pupils dilate and our mouth starts to feel dry. Our hands and feet may feel cold, or jaws clench. Maybe our entire muscles become a little more tense. You may see teeth grinding or feel hot all over, have sort of the knotted stomach or the sweaty palms. And then looking at the parasympathetic system, so when that's been engaged or overengaged, our heart rate slows and we feel it kind of pounding in our chest. You may notice that you're holding your breath, or just kind of not taking a normal breath. Feeling sort of frozen in time, stuck in your body. And I think one other thing that I identify this is like stuck on one task. So I just am kind of thinking about the same thing over and over again, or find myself coming back to something. Feeling stiff or heavy, and just an overall sense of dread. And then having difficulty thinking of what to do next, and just that blank. If your brain's not circling over and over on one thing, maybe it's just totally blank and it's having trouble focusing on any one of those. So having this laser focus, or feeling in the zone, maybe that's one thing that people identify more with the sympathetic nervous system. But in that situation, or in the situation of just having your mind go blank, it's common that if you're working in these high demanding situations and you're kind of going through this process, you notice a crash where you just start to either come down from this stressful situation, and that's an indication that your body's been in it for too long. If you are feeling this high of, especially some of the sympathetic system, you feel your adrenaline pumping, and then you just experience this crash, that's a good indicator to know, oh, maybe I was in that stressful state for too long. And this is also, I think, a really important motivator for us as to why it's important to self-calm, because this is where we see a lot of the long-term effects for the health of our body. So the heart disease and the higher risk for stroke that can come from the raised blood pressure. And then just also, the effect of all of these things on our immune system and our ability to heal and recover from things quicker. So, I think this slide, obviously it's helpful to be able to identify this and know when maybe you're in a stress response, but is also a good motivator, I think, for, practicing overall good self-care for our body. So we know that stress accumulates. It is not something that, you can just say, okay, well, I had a really stressful week. And this weekend, I'm just going to, take a break and do all my self-care and it'll all just wash away. It doesn't happen in like that one chunk of time. It's something that accumulates over time, and we have to be able to address it over time. So self-calming is about being aware of your stress response state and actively trying to recover in those moments. It's important to do this in the moment because our body doesn't discriminate between a minor everyday stressor and those major, more traumatic life stressors. And this is the same biochemical chain reaction, um, you know, regardless of what type of stressful event it is we're experiencing. So because our body can remain in this stress response state for extended periods of time, it's really important to actively work to come out of it. So, just knowing that it is likely, especially in the beginning when we're training our brain, a very active and conscious choice that we have to make to realize that we're in a stress response state. So similar to our emotions, emotional expressiveness, we have to be able to first identify our emotion. Here we have to be able to first identify that we're in a stressor state, because sometimes that can be challenging, especially if it's something we experience frequently. Um, and then make the conscious choice in that moment when you identify it to start recovering and helping your body get back to baseline. So why isn't it important to regulate? Um, the fight and flight was very useful in earlier sort of caveman times. I think everyone's heard that reference. But in modern times, it can be a health hazard. And especially in the case if you're constantly swept up in that fight, flight, or freeze response. So, I just like to remind everyone that we're already naturally very resilient. Every person, regardless of who you are or how much training or, priority you put to your self-care or positive thoughts and positive thinking, you're already a very resilient person. So, Dr. Rick Hansen is a neuroscientist who said that most of the time, the threats that we imagine aren't as likely as we think they are, and their consequences won't be so bad. We're more able to cope than we give ourselves credit for. So, especially during today's time, the fear of the unknown is just sort of a constant stressor. And I know that it's one of the biggest threats for our brain and one of the quickest ways for us to jump into this response. So, that's one thing I wanted to point out, that I know, it's something that I think this is really poignant to our times now. And also for the FOP community, I think that this quote can be hard to hear because a lot of the stressors that we experience they do have very real threats. And so to hear that, the threats we imagine aren't as likely as we think they are, like sometimes, especially if you're someone with, a medical condition, every threat, especially in today's times, is a very real threat. But I think it's just important to know that that's not always the case. And because we're trying to essentially untrain our brains from assuming that every stressor is very dangerous, it's helpful for us to start doing this self-calming and trying to combat that in every situation, no matter the intensity of it. And I also wanted to take a minute here because I know we have several caregivers who participate in this series to focus specifically on caregivers. And this is more so especially geared for caregivers of young children. So self-calming for caregivers, you must be able to regulate your own nervous system before you can help others regulate theirs. And I'm sure you all have heard of a quote similar to this: model the care or calm you hope to see in others. Additionally, knowing that try to mirror the calm, sorry for the typo, clam, try to mirror the calm energy of people who are good at self-regulation. So this mirror neuron is not just an analogy, it's an actual type of sensory motor cell in the brain that automatically turns on when an individual performs an action and sees another individual performing that same action. So mirror neurons allow us to learn through imitation. They help our body, they help us to reflect body language, facial expressions, and emotions. And they're an essential part of our social life, especially for child development. They're really critical to relationships and education. So there is a reason why it's so important to stay calm around people who can't effectively regulate their own nervous systems. And that's because when they see you practicing this calming, they're able to, mirror that, or it's one step easier. It makes it that much easier for them to be able to join you in that. So I do have a short video here that I wanted to share with all of you that kind of just talks you through, especially for a child, why it is that this is so important for us. So please bear with me. I've showed another video and it's worked out well. I'm hoping that this one goes well, but if it's not, please speak up and I can make some edits.
In this resilience snapshot, we're going to talk about the ability to self-calm and how to bring calm to those around us. For both adults and children, the fear of the unknown triggers a stress response from our nervous system, which can cause us to become dysregulated. The brain draws upon past experiences to know how to respond in current situations. Do I fight? Do I flee? Do I freeze? Do I remain calm? How do I regulate in this situation? Children have fewer life experiences. And in the case of COVID-19, adults are also navigating new territory. Children look to the adults around them to know how to respond and how to feel safe in the world around them. Actually, in times like this, we're all wondering how to feel safe in the world around us as we navigate this new normal. The more authentically calm you can appear, then the more those around you will also be calm. This is what we call interpersonal neurobiology, or mirror neurons. One of the quickest and most efficient ways that you can get calm is take a couple of deep breaths, in through your nose and out through your nose. Truly, taking a couple of deep breaths can make a really big difference. It's hard to calm others when we're having difficulty calming ourselves. Just remember, I've got you because I've got me. More than ever, we have to have the courage to be regulators to ourselves and the others around us. A little bit can go a long way. Thank you for tuning in. We look forward to bringing you more resilient snapshots. And in the meantime, let's all take another deep breath.
Okay, so you may be wondering what you can do to start practicing self-calming. And I wanted to reiterate that self-calming is not about floating through life with rose-colored glasses and just ignoring your stressors. It's realizing that we have the power to ramp up those quiet regions and to dampen down the excessively active ones when we need to help our brain calm down. So examples of this can be the regular breathing exercises, practicing meditation or guided imagery. And I do feel like meditation especially is one of those things that can be very hit or miss for people. Some people find it very challenging to just get to that quiet state and be able to focus on a meditation. So I think guided imagery, if you're someone who has who struggles to kind of quiet their mind, that guided imagery can be a really good alternative to that. Practicing positive self-talk. We're going to look at an example of that here in a minute. Listening to calming music, having calming images or quotes available, connecting with the energy of other calming people. So when we talk about our support system as a facet of our resilience, we'll dive into this a little bit deeper, but it is sort of knowing who in your support system kind of is able to play the different roles. Like some people need a cheerleader, some people need someone to just sit with them, and some people need sort of that calming presence. So it's identifying which aspect of your support system can provide that for you and connecting, reaching out to that person. Grounding. So as I mentioned, that is the, really taking root of where you are. Mindfulness. If Mindfulness is another good alternative to meditation if you're someone who struggles to, again, kind of be able to quiet your mind. Mindfulness is a good way to kind of start your day if you wanted to do meditation in the morning with a very purposeful and intentional reflective period. Sensory engagement, again, whether that's going on a nature walk and really focusing in on the aspects of your senses that you're enjoying during that time. Just this. So this is another video that you'll all be able to click on here when I post the slides. And just this activity is really focusing on, quieting your mind and picking out one activity or one stressor in your life, and really just focusing on that one thing, as opposed to being sort of inundated by the many different stressors we have out there. Another way to practice self-calming is to do a combination of several of these. So this next strategy is several of these. It is a self-calming mantra. So it is a combination of sort of a positive thought. You can think of a word or a phrase that brings you feelings of safety, peace, and relaxation. So you could say, I am safe, I am calm, I am strong. And it is repeating this word to yourself while taking deep, slow breaths. And this really is one way. It's an easy to reference one that you can kind of practice or, go back to over and over again. So that's one thing you'll notice is that it does say with practice, your brain will become conditioned. So that's a challenging part of self-calming, is remembering to do it frequently enough that it becomes a natural reaction. And this conditioning of the mind and the body takes place over time. It's not something that, we do once and then we expect to stick. It's something that we have to really consciously make an effort of doing as often as we can when we find ourselves in those stressful states, knowing that eventually it will start to become more natural over time. And one specific facet of self-calming that I wanted to dive into is the muscular tension. So this is something that I feel like within the FOP community can be challenging for some of our individuals with FOP because of the transformation of some of their muscle into bone. But I think it's especially helpful for our caregivers, and because I know that muscular tension is one thing that I experience. And as the slide says, it's the largest source of information processed by our brains. And so I think that, for people to be able to practice it to the extent that they can is really helpful. But our muscular tension goes hand in hand with stress. Stress and tension clog our brain channels. And this is also a aspect of what impacts our ability to think and process information. So learning to relax our muscles helps us think more clearly and concentrate more easily. And if you haven't already seen the presentation from our 2019 family gathering, we had an energy medicine practitioner, Gloria McCahill, come and visit. And she did a presentation that really also talks about sort of unclogging some of these brain channels and helping to relax our muscles and increase the flow of energy in our body. So I will also link to that when these slides are recorded or are posted. As a helpful way for you all to be able to focus on muscular tension as a form of self-calming. So also then just scheduling self-calming into your day, knowing that because this is something that can be so easy as deep breathing, sometimes it does get, I think, kind of pushed down in our list of priorities or underrated in the list of things that we have to do. So some things that can be helpful to integrate are use some predictable calming routines. We're going to go through an example of that here in a minute. Be aware of the situations that normally trigger a stress reaction for you. So if you're having, a reoccurring situation that is stressful, being aware of that and making a plan to overcome it. That's an exercise we're going to do together here in our workshop period. Or if you have trouble knowing, when you're feeling most overwhelmed during the day, asking for input from a caring friend or a coworker can be a really helpful way to identify maybe what that stress reaction or what that trigger is. And I don't want to be contradictory because in the first session we did, I did say that smartphones or technology is one thing that can be really overburdening and can cause a lot of stress or overstimulation for people. But if that is something that you're very tapped into, that's already a part of your daily routine, trying to turn it into a tool by installing one of many different smartphone apps for self-calming. There's calming music, breathing, guided meditations, and all of these. So below the list, Calm, Insight Timer, Headspace, and the Mindfulness app are just a few examples of some of the ones out there that you can use. And then knowing that self-calming is all about returning to yourself in times of stress to create feelings of calm. So, you know, there's no one right way to practice this self-calming or to sort of return to your calm self. It's just finding what works best for you and practicing it. So finding routine times of the day, the drive home, when you're doing dishes, you know, just using that time that you have carved out to identify what maybe one of the challenging experiences of the day was and how it made you feel, and really working to process that stress in that moment. So 4 times a day that you can practice self-calming, and I think these are sort of natural, maybe more so before everyone started working from home than now, but still, you know, once things start to return to a little more normalcy, I think these are really critical sort of transitions during the day that it's important to be aware of. So in the morning, when you start your day, really waking up with a relaxed and a focused state. Trying to start your day calm is always a good way. And then throughout the day. So, you know, whenever you're at work, really, I think when you're switching from task to task, going from one thing to another, whether you're the parent of a young child who's running from activity to activity, or you're someone who's in a workplace and juggling a lot of different tasks, being prepared to manage those stressful situations throughout the day. At the end of the day, so, you know, when you're transitioning from your work or your busy daytime activities to more of the relaxing evening part of your time, finding an opportunity in that transition window to really look back at, you know, the previous part of the day and identify any stressors, or try to kind of break down any of the stress that you're holding in your body at that point. And then at night, falling asleep in a relaxed state. So this is another aspect that there's a lot of different resources out there. There are books or, you know, sort of meditations that a lot of people listen to when they're falling asleep at night. I know for me, this tends to be one where my mind starts to race the most. So really doing what you can to sort of nip those actions in the bud and prevent them from carrying over, especially once you're starting to go into the sleep stage. So what is the end goal of all of this, of our self-calming, our ability to self-calm? It's about being aware of our stress response and actively working towards recovery. So to be effective, skills must be practiced often and in a comfortable environment at first. And this can help us then automatically kick in when the pressure's on. So it's something, you know, obviously when we have more of the little stressors, it's easy for us to implement our self-calming skills as opposed to more of the bigger traumatic triggers, which can be really hard to tap into this resource. But doing it as often as you can in the beginning really helps to integrate it into your the retraining of your brain. And it's important, I think, or helpful to know also that we have these tools with us always. So it's a part of our body. We were born knowing how to self-soothe. And as we get older, we tend to kind of forget how to do those things. We just have to remind our body or our brain to do those. So that is the sort of more lecture style portion for today. I do have a couple of activities that I would love for us to try out if you all are interested in that. So if you have muted your microphone, feel free